There's a question here about mixing through a mastering process, and I'm really glad that that question was asked because that's something that's coming up all the time for us, and it's actually happening more and more with all these tools so easily available for anybody. Here's the thing with that. If you're mixing through any type of processing, whether it's something like this, the software that we developed, or anything that's out there, even actually just a simple compressor on the master bus, that is, depending on how hard you hit it, a lot of times greatly influencing your mix decisions because you're monitoring through it. Here is a scenario that we find comes up sometimes. Somebody spent all this great time and effort getting their mix sounding just right for them. Their artist approves it, and maybe it's been mixed through some processing on the bus, and then they take off that processing, anticipating it to be recreated in mastering, but they don't even listen to it. They just take it off and send that into mastering, and sometimes they don't even send it to tell us, and we would never know that it was there. So that sometimes happens, and when you do that, it's not as simple as just taking off a process. You're actually, in a sense, kind of adding a process. You're changing the musical balance because all your musical decisions were based off how that process was influencing your mix decisions. Take it off, you're in a different place. Glue is lost, connectivity is lost, sometimes snares pop out. I can hear it. A lot of times, I'll just say, hey, you know what? This sounds like they were mixing through something and they took it off. And I'll call them up, and 99% of the time, it is the fact, it is the case. Cutting to the chase here, if you mix through something, you're pretty much, depending on how hard you hit it or how hard that processing was working, you're married to it at that point. That's part of your musical process. That's essentially your mix. The downside of that is going too far with it and not knowing. Then you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Because if you take it off, it doesn't feel connected, the glue is not there, the musicality is lost. Put it back on, it feels overly processed in a non-musical way. That's what you want to watch. You want to be careful. You don't want to be in that place. So we don't see it very often, but every once in a while, maybe once or twice a year, we run into it. We work on an album a day, so once or twice a year we have those types of scenarios. We have to make a call and say, hey, listen, I think you've gone too far with this. Yet if you take it off, it doesn't represent the decisions made. It doesn't represent what the artist has been listening to. So those are the things to watch out for in terms of those things. Not saying don't use these things when mixing, if they're part of your sound. If that's what gets you to the finish line, and it feels great, and it just musically feels great, that's part of your sound. There's plenty of great seasoned mixing engineers that work with stuff on the bus, and it always comes out great for them. So,
but differentiate the process. Differentiate the process. One's one thing and one's another thing. And the art of it, and the concept of it, and the philosophy of it, they're all the same down the line. It's the same as cooking. It's the same as anything in life. How the ingredients come together to create a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. I've said that publicly many times, and that really is it, is the whole that's greater than the sum of the parts. And remember this, the music that you hear is only heard, well, 99.9% of it's heard on consumer-related devices. So it's coming back through tiny little D-to-A chips, tiny little D-to-A amplifier into some headphones or Bluetooth situation or something like that. So what we're doing in the studio has to account for how it's going to be decoded later. It's not there in the studio in some great form. It's there in the studio in anticipation of how it's going to be played back as a file. A file isn't music. It's only music when it gets decoded. And when it gets decoded, it's going to be in a consumer device. So we're taking that into account. That's what we're working for.
Mm-hmm. And then also to the process of mastering in and of itself, to then step back and listen to, if you're working on an album, all the songs in one sitting, hopefully with some objectivity if possible. And now you're mastering. So you can add some mastering processes as you mix if that, some people like to do that. And what I mean by mastering processes is, let's just, for very basic terms, just adding some compression and limiting on the master bus, for instance, and mixing into that processing. Okay, maybe it could be argued that could be blurring the lines a little bit between mixing and mastering. Even if you do that, now you've got all your tracks, all your songs in that place. Now listen as a mastering engineer, or take it to a mastering house, or listen as a mastering engineer using software like we developed. What does it need globally? What does each individual song need to create something that can be released as a finished product and plays down and sounds like one cohesive thing?
Somebody wants to know what our preferred systems to listen on. Whatever system's in front of you is the preferred system. Maybe a better way to put that is the more consumer grade, the better. For me, iPhone, and through the car. I'll Bluetooth it into my car, and then I'll think, okay, well, this is how most people are going to hear it. Or I'll listen to earbuds. But generally speaking, on these big speakers that we have behind us that you see, if you can get it sounding good on there, it's going to sound good in any format. And you consider these days we're doing the MFIT, CD, vinyl. Some people do different EQs for different formats. We choose to do the same for each format. So we do it one time, sounds great on these guys, and once we get it sounding good in there, it tends to sound good in all environments.
Yeah. Somebody asked iPhone speaker.
No.
I think what Gavin's talking about is earbuds, or listening through
anything consumer related, and because the consumers are going to be listening to this. Is it going to sound good on any device? I actually have checked stuff out on an iPhone speaker, but you got a mono signal. It's not a good scenario.
Yeah. But the other important thing is understanding how this stuff, like Gavin was saying earlier, how's it going to be digested out there? How is it going? Just not even talking about the speaker, talking about the conversion that happens in a phone is very important because everybody's listening on phones now. Cars these days sound great overall, even just base level systems. Entry level cars, your Honda Civic out there. It sounds balanced, and we knew that, and everybody listens in the car. Now, when CDs were still happening, we would, and they still, we still make car tests when we're mastering in the studio, and we have some clients coming in. They're listening on our speakers, and they say, "Wow, this sounds great," but they don't know our system. They've never heard it before, for instance. So we make a car test. We send them out with a CD, or we put the files on their phone, and they go out to their car, which is a familiar environment, and they listen there. So we saw that happening so much that we determined that everybody's reference point is their car. So what we did is we put this software on the iPad, and with IK, we anticipated that everybody wanted to check their work in the car. So
and the iPhone.
So people can take their settings on this software, put it on their iPhone or their iPad, go to the car, then they can fine tune their decisions while in the car. Take those settings, go back to the studio, and fine-tune from there. So it eliminates this guess and check between to and from the car, this guess and check type scenario, and you can actually make fine-tuned decisions while listening in the car, which has been really helpful and fun for people.
It's a very cool thing.